Hi guys, welcome to SUSU podcast with me, Demi Samande. Today's guest is Iyinoluwa, also known as E, the co-founder of Flutterwave and Andela, and currently the CEO of Future Africa. I'm so excited to sit down with E today because it really is an incredible entrepreneur with so much to share. So without further ado, guys, let's jump into this week's episode. Iyinoluwa, aka Mr. E.
Yes, Mr. E.
Welcome to SUSU podcast.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you today, to have you in the hot seat.
Absolutely.
After several months of trying.
How
long did we try?
It's been a while.
Your schedule is crazy.
Working for the country. So
You're
tough.
working for the world, honestly. Putting Africa on the map. I absolutely love it.
Best.
Absolutely love it. So I had the pleasure of meeting you, I believe, last year at the Art Hotel at an event. And before that, I'd been hearing about you in the ecosystem, the people to speak to. When you're looking for investors and all of that, Future Africa came up, and I was just like, oh, okay, cool. I'll add it to my to-do list, and I'll probably reach out and stuff. And then I was privileged, and I think we were at the event, and somebody said, oh, have you met E? And I was like, no. And then we got talking because I didn't know what you looked like, but I heard about you guys. So we got talking with your big agbada, very intimidating, by the way.
I only wear it for official events.
And I was like, so we spoke, and I was like, I really want to tell you about my company. And I think I tried to sort of pitch you there and then. I was like, this guy knows his onions. He's been in this ecosystem, in this game for some time.
Been on the ground for a while.
Yes. It's an absolute pleasure to have you at SUSU. So let's just delve right into it, right? Your career, probably in the last 2 decades, I'll probably say, has been quite interesting. I think, the African stage has been sort of primed a little bit for somebody like you to come along for a while. Does it feel like a very lonely space to be in when people talk about E, the work that you've done? Because everybody knows your story. I like to assume many people know your story already, so we don't necessarily need to go into that so much.
Would be very boring.
I think I think the conversation really that I want us to have today really is the man behind the story, right? And some of the lessons that we can really take forward for Africa with all the work that you have done. The last 2 decades, just summarize it for me. What has it really been like for you? And is the space truly lonely? Do we have enough ease in this ecosystem?
There will never be enough ease in the ecosystem. And honestly, it's funny you said 2 decades because it's only been one.
So I say that interestingly because I know that your story began to be prepped before you actually came into the ecosystem.
I guess, yes.
And that story is very pivotal.
Yeah.
It's very important.
I would say a lot of very significant things happened before one would say like one landed here to do the work. But like I was saying earlier, there can never be enough ease, right? We need like 1 million more, right? People who build, people who are looking at society's problems and seeing incredible opportunities. People who are driven to execute at a very high level. And to be fair, I've seen a lot of ease. It's just they're not enough. There will never be enough because there's just so many more. Is that on the
global platform, or are you talking about Africa specifically?
Africa specifically. I mean, we've invested now in 100 companies, right? So that's a lot of people. I don't know if they're all E's. I would hope they're not. I hope they're better than E. But I would say we see a lot of builders. We meet a lot of builders like yourself every day. It's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us going. That's why we do what we do. And for us, just every time watching the magic of crazy people coming to this country, looking at our crazy challenges and saying, hey, you know what? I'm not scared. I'm not going to get on a plane and go where it's sane. Sena climbs, like they call it, right? I'm going to stay here in the madness and build because I can. I think that for us is like, those are our heroes. That's what we do. That's why we do what we do.
Fantastic. So in coming into your space, And I know that initially for you didn't study technology.
No,
I
didn't.
You didn't even go to school for tech.
I didn't even finish the law, Seth.
It's really interesting. So you didn't finish law, and you sort of felt that I wanted to go into this sort of technology space. And I know that with you was a bit of a uphill because Dad wasn't very happy about that, from what I heard, right?
Yes,
Dad was like, "What are you doing, dude?
Yes.
That wasn't the plan, right?" Like many of us, it's never really the plan, and we have to go through that transition of trying to convince, let's say, our sponsors, because Shabi was mom and dad paying the bills before that, right?
That's it.
Right. They've convinced our sponsors that this is the direction we want to take this thing. And having now entered that space, and you've discovered, wow, what do I do? How did you navigate it, knowing full well that there wasn't that many people? You're coming in from Canada.
Yeah.
You see your tech friends there that sort of introduced you into the space. You come in, you now look at Africa and you think, where on earth do I begin? How did you start carving out that African story in the investment and tech space?
I mean, for me, I came back home, not the plan, right? The plan was to stay in Canada like the rest of my siblings did, and get the permanent residency and the passport and live happily ever after. And I decided to break that jinx and come back home, without even telling my parents. So I handled it very poorly. So I don't think mine is the perfect excuse. I kind of bummed around my uncles for a bit and tried to build something. Obviously, I didn't understand the context. I didn't understand the way society worked, what value constituted, what I was doing. So the business failed, right? Quite honestly, it failed. And it took us reinventing that business around what was real value for people, which was employment with Andela, for me to get back, so to speak, on that pedestal and then start to build from there up to where we are today. And it was challenging, extremely challenging at the beginning. You had to make a lot of sacrifices. You can imagine, you're a, foreign grad, come to Nigeria. You're not accepted by any party, right? Because the local grads have their networks, right? And the foreign grads have their status, right? So you don't fit into anyone, right?
What year was this?
This is 2013. So basically, I mean, for me, I bumbled a bit, right? My parents were not supportive of me coming back. So that meant naturally that, no matter how much I tried, I wasn't going to get a comfortable landing, right? Except I was going to do what my parents wanted me to do, which at the time was, look, my dad had spent most of his career in oil and gas. He had a few bosses that were very happy to hear from him. He was happy to send me off there. Failing that, go to law school, right? And those were the options that he laid in front of me, in spite of the undesirable situation we all found ourselves in. And for me, neither of those were options, right? I chose a third option, which was entrepreneurship. So for me to have chosen that option, I needed to make it work. And so when I came back, what that meant was I was building my company. It wasn't going very well. In fact, it went so badly. Eventually, at the end of the year, I went home and to see my parents. And I think one thing that going home was really saved me because, when I got home, my dad was just like, look, I'm not hearing it, but, you're here. And, at the time we're having a prayer and fasting program. We actually, my dad's crazy. So he does his prayer and fasting program through December, through Christmas. Wow. So we start on the 23rd. So every year. Now he's made it.
So no Christmas dinner?
Well, very muted and only after 5. So it's a very different kind of Christmas. But anyway, I really took it seriously. I had a real encounter with God during that program. And quite frankly, the next year, things really, really turned around for me, right? Because, I miraculously, we had an old investor who we had pitched a long time ago come back to us, invest. That led to a trip to New York, where I met for the first time with my co-founders after a very long time, because I couldn't afford to fly to them in Canada. So we all flew into New York. During that meeting, I met Jeremy, my co-founder at Andela. That meeting led to the setup of Andela. So things kind of went up from there. But then what I realized once I got that break was I put my whole heart into it, right? Everything I had. And it wasn't easy. I mean, what that meant was you couldn't hang out with your comfortable crew from your operational and social class. I remember there's a club called SIP, right? And then I was still the party going type. So I remember, one day my friends was like, okay, this was very early in my coming back. My friend was like, oh, join us at SIP. And if you know SIP well, it's almost like you can't get in except you're paying rent money, right, to buy a table. And I was like, that's the way I could afford that. I had bills to pay. So I remember getting to the door, them asking me to put down money for a table. And I'm like, I don't have that kind of money. That's my rent. Of course, the bouncers wouldn't hear it. So I got bounced, and I felt so bad because, everybody was there. And
did you ever tell anybody that story?
Not really. It's just, it's just something I remember now about how you couldn't hang out with people in your quote unquote social class, the guys you went to high school with, because I did have the good fortune of going to really good schools in spite of the fact that my parents were not very wealthy. But that was like the one splurge he allowed us, right? Like you have to go to a really good school. So I remember not being able to hang out with those guys. And at the same time, you're not fully accepted by the folks you're here, because they can hear the phone, and you look out of place, and but nonetheless, I did make very good friends among them. I had two roommates, both of them excellent guys. Both of them one of them went to LASU, the other one went to Unilag. The one that went to LASU, I think, he was founder of Tekabao. Yeah. When you want to build something here, I think you really have to lean into the discomfort and learn, right? And I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in that space where they're not really sure where they belong in the society. Like, should they be, Demi from London with the British accent, or do they have to transform to Demilade, from Misaleko? You never know, right?
It's funny because I think I probably went through that same period, but I already had a knack for it because I always use that ability to stand out from the crowd sort of for my benefit. So Demi from London would go into Mushin Market and say to the ladies, please, I want to buy foam. And they're like, oh, they make fun of you, and they'll do the whole gisting thing. When you think they don't understand, they'll call you names, or Egboile, Kilonso, blah blah blah. They make all the little funny insults, as you like to call it, right? And then the moment where it comes to negotiating price, and I'll say, Kulewok, Emano, right? I now become the person who's like, oh wow, you don't really belong here, but at the same time, we're going to accept you because you're making an effort. So I think sometimes it can be a tricky place. It can be a very isolating place if you let it. But yeah, please, if you can just elaborate a little bit more about how you felt in those moments.
No, I mean, for me, it was just, it forced me into making a choice to make it work, right? Because I feel like actually the comfort could have been distracting, right? Especially given the conditions that would come with, right? Yeah, you'd get an allowance, you'd get a nice, cushy oil and gas job, you would get a nice car, you'd live somewhere decent. And a lot of people just sort of like, you know what? That dream I had, it's not worth giving all of this up for. And that's how one day before you know it, you're 50, and that thing that brought you to Nigeria just never happened.
So not everybody can come into Nigeria and land into those positions of oil and gas. You had the connect from mom and dad to sort of help you with that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't like it was even like my dad was like, it was just, hey, some people owe me favors. This seems like a logical thing to do. Let's get you that job. I know you can do the job, right? So let's get you that job. I think a lot of people who actually land here from abroad come here with an expectation of that, because I don't see any reason why. I mean, if you actually think about it, what most parents want is for you to get that study visa and disappear.
That's really strange.
Yeah, and only come see them when you have their grandchild.
That is really odd. Because I would have thought it was the other way around, that they want you to go to the abroad, they want you to get the lessons, they want you to get the currency. Then ultimately they want you to come home.
It's the rich kids. It's the rich kids. Like if your parents are middle class, there's nothing for you here. They know. So they just want you to get that job in the US that gives you a fair chance at life, right? But if you have parents with means and networks and connections, I mean, for my dad, I don't think he wanted to be in a position to go and ask. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. Really, ideally,
he didn't want to call in. He didn't have to feel like he needed to call in those favors.
Do you understand?
To say, yes.
Ideally, he would have preferred you got the ticket out. Go find a job. Go work for some big company in the UK. And when you marry, we'll come and when it's time for baby, we'll do a mugwa. And now you guys are American or Canadian citizens, and you leave us with our Naija wahala.
I think I do understand what you mean, though, because initially when I thought about moving here, it wasn't something I had planned. It was just I come against a wall, and I just felt that the UK just wasn't being merciful to me in terms of the stress that I was dealing with at the time. And Nigeria just seemed like an escape initially. It was like, just go and just experience it.
Did you come in December?
No, I think I did.
Just so people was scammed you, because you're saying the stress in UK wasn't being fed. I'm like,
oh no, it was
really?
It was a lot of business stress. It was the dead of winter. The studio
really?
was cold.
Okay.
I was carrying furniture on my head. The staff were too expensive. The tax man was too much. And I was just like, my business partner at that time had left. So I was literally in the lurch by myself, dealing with all this business stress. Yeah. And somebody just said to me, you should go to Nigeria and really just try it out. And I was just like, what for? And obviously when I did come, I said, let me just go for a month. It felt like a holiday, right? Even though it wasn't Christmas. But the weather was giving.
Now you need the IJGB.
Maybe the second time around. Yeah. But the first time, it just felt very much like a vacation. Yeah. The weather was very giving. Yeah. The people were incredibly helpful and very, very, very friendly. Yeah. And I felt like, wait, this is a little bit more relaxed than what I'm dealing with at home currently. Not that home was that bad. I was just going through a really bad period, I think. So Nigeria kind of served as like a little escape. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then obviously I then leaned into the learning, which was, where are the opportunities for furniture makers here? What's the condition of the industry right now? Is there actually a gap here that I can fill and equally make money? And once I discovered that there was, then I came back for Christmas. Then the party started. Then it was like, yeah.
So at what point did it dawn on you that you had just been scammed? I know you're supposed to be asking the question, but this is my favorite thing to ask people.
I don't know. I honestly think maybe it was a point where the first officers turned up at my factory asking for tax money that I didn't think I owed.
Fantastic.
I think that was the first feeling of I've been scammed, I probably think. Or when you buy something and it's like, no, that's not what I paid for. Or, it can be a little bit tricky, but it's give and take, right?
No, absolutely.
It's give and take.
There's no way without its troubles, right? I think that's what you realize in everything. And you got to pick the struggle that aligns with your goals. So,
well, it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah, definitely easier said than done.
Easier said than done. So just sort of fast forward in your journey a little bit. You went through Flutterwave. We've done Andela. We're now sort of at it's Tech City, right?
Well, so that's interesting. I think you mean Itano, right? Our talent city. But actually, I'm not the CEO of that. I run the fund, Future Africa. One of Future Africa's biggest investments is in Itano.
Is it in Itano? Yeah. So when is that pegged for launch?
So it depends on which part you're talking about. So if you're talking about Itano is really a digital free zone. Now there is a physical component. I think that will take probably till 2026 to come online. Because it's physical construction, we're doing the roads, it's 50,000 square meters of development. So
it's
gonna
huge.
Be a lot of work.
When I sort of heard about it initially, I was like, Alaris City is prime location. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. A lot of things that we're dealing with, some of the setbacks we're dealing with in business, this could help to alleviate a lot of that, right? And start opening up opportunities.
Exactly.
When you describe this thing as the Silicon Valley of Africa, it's not a small it's not a small leap at all. It's huge.
Yeah.
So how do you go about where do you get the confidence, right, to think you can go about building something like that? What has happened in the last 10 years that's kind of sold that seed in you and said, like, you know what, I can do this, we can do this, we will in fact do this?
When I was much younger, right, before I really settled in here, I used to think that it made sense to try to solve what I now call problems at the margin, right? So build an app, do something, something that made you look cool, but wasn't too far off there. And I realized that, look, if you're really serious about building a business in Nigeria, you go after the fundamental problems that people have, that they believe they can't solve, right? So, and my first foray into that was Andela, because Andela's problem was clear as daylight, right? 40% youth unemployment. Obviously, there needed to be something like an Andela, right? Because 40% youth unemployment, there was no jobs, there was very little growth, if you remember. And the reality was people just couldn't afford to pay more. Rising oil prices had just crashed, So you were on the wrong side of the bend, right? And you needed something. People needed to survive. And we thought, okay, what happens when we can divorce your job from your geographic location and build essentially a remote work industry on the back of that? So I think the biggest lesson for me in doing all of this is just realizing that it doesn't really take a lot of money to solve huge problems. You just have to have the right kind of systems thinking. Take on something small, because we started with 4 people, trained 4 people on how to build JavaScript, put them on a freelance site, understood a little bit. Before you know it, we were training 20 people. Before you know it, we're training 20 people every 2 weeks. Before you knew it, we're training 3 trains of 20 people every 3 weeks. Before you knew it, we had scaled to the whole country, and we're doing all the training offline in 22 states in small communities. So
that's incredible.
If you think about it from a systems level, you can solve a big problem. With Itono, the problem we're trying to really solve is that our laws as a country are not representative of the reality of our economy, which is that over the last 40 years, 55% of our country's economy is now services.
I'm going to get to that, because as a manufacturer, that really nerves me.
It does.
But I'm going to come back to it. I'm really going to come back to that.
So when you think about that and you say, okay, where is the country's incentives and all that going? They say, it's going to manufacturing and trade. And that's what all these free zones are for. Well, if you are, as a country, you're 55% services, it's only a matter of time before you realize you have to incentivize people to bring service companies here and export services to the rest of the world. If you think about what we do in Africa, for example, like our banking services are some of the best in Africa, financial services industry. Are we intentionally exporting that globally? Right? You think about our professional services. Some of the KPMG people here, McKinsey, PwC, they go anywhere and they excel. Are we intentionally exporting that talent globally? So it's not just about call centers or, I'm talking about, anything that anybody can do as a service and combining the fact that anything you can do as a service right now, you can do on the internet. You can do via the internet. You can divorce the geography from the service. So what does that look like? I was talking with a friend this morning about design outsourcing. Like, we have all these CAD trained engineers. Is it possible for us to put them on the platform and get them to like design things remotely for other people to manufacture elsewhere.
So I'm a manufacturer myself.
I do.
Yes, that's where my passion lies.
Yes.
So when you think about services and tech, how do you envisage that merging with the manufacturing space? Because as much as, yes, 55% services, Africa needs manufacturing, whether we like it or not. Africa needs to be able to position itself to utilize its raw resources and create value-added products to export to other places, because that creates a huge opportunity in creating other industries and other work. And if you really want to tackle the unemployment issues, how do we possibly begin to do that without manufacturing?
I think we really have to ask ourselves what we're competitive at, right? There are certain parts of the manufacturing value chain where we're not competitive, purely because we don't have power. So whenever somebody comes to me and I say, okay, how much power do you need to actually do this? And they tell me, I'm like, yeah, don't do this. You'll never be able to compete, because at the end of the day, the customer is only better off if they get the cheapest price. On the other hand, our labor is very cheap. So there are parts of the manufacturing value chain where you can get a lot more value by doing it here than anywhere else in the world.
Very interesting. So what does the next 10, 20 years look like for you? Because I know you've exited several companies already. Yeah. You're taking on real challenges, right? What does it look like for you in the next few years, and how do you feel that those decisions for you is going to play into Africa overall?
I feel like we just released an EP album, and everyone's like, oh, wow, that's so cool. It's such a brand new sound. But now that we have quite a number of things that are falling into place, we can do the work now to build things at scale. You know what I mean? We have a very supportive leader of the ecosystem in government. We have a country that is poised to grow. We have an economic situation where all the things we've been saying for the last 10 years are now gospel truth. We need to focus on talents. Productivity is the way to go. Connectivity needs to bring stuff, needs to be cheaper. Everything now is becoming, we need to be more productive on food and on things outside of just software. Everything we've been saying for the last 10 years is almost now true as of right now. So the question that I ask myself all the time is, given that reality, what should we do? And that, I think, is the question we have to now answer over the next 10 years, right? How do we take the things that we've built and get them to national scale?
Absolutely. And I think I always ask myself this question every day is, how do you get people to work? How do you get them working? How do you get them productive? We can't teach everybody to be developers. Everybody can't be a developer. Yeah. Where are the other opportunities? Where are the other things we need to train people?
There's a lot of other opportunities, so many. So I think it's to show people where they can work.
Where they can work. Where do you see sort of Nigeria going in the next 10 years, possibly, in terms of other industries? What other industries do you think we could create?
And we've got a lot of room because...
There is a lot of room, right?
Yeah, because, what a lot of has happened over the last 5 years is that a lot of the barriers to productivity in a lot of industries have come down. So, I'd love to see more Nigerian companies tap into that space.
Which particular space?
The space of many spaces, but let me be more specific, right? You think about things like healthcare. What can technology help us do to reduce the cost of healthcare, right? You think about education. What can technology help us do to reduce the costs and increase the outcomes with education, right? You think about things like, you think about things like renewable energy. You think about things like agriculture, how we make our food. You think about things like transport. And in each of these spaces, you can identify very useful innovations that have transformed that space that just need to be scaled across the continent.
It's really funny. I feel like Nigeria sometimes can be such a conundrum. I don't know too much about other African countries, but being that we are the giant of Africa,
We still
I imagine there are problems kind of sometimes overshadow the problems that other African countries may be possibly facing sometimes when we talk about Africa as a whole. And I think in these conversations, I always notice that the conversations tends to lean into how can we make things cheaper in Africa? Mm-hmm. How can we make things more accessible to Africans? And I always wonder if you think that's the route or that's the direction we should be moving towards in terms of solving Africa's problems. Is it really about us making things cheaper, or trying to get us to the point where we can sort of balance out with the rest of the world? Because when I think of Andela, right, Andela didn't bring in young people to train, only to just keep paying them their 50Ks, 100Ks. It sort of almost matched them to the world. It almost sort of got them closer and got them access to what they possibly wouldn't have had access to before, which in turn made the industry very competitive.
But it's a productivity thing, right? So really the question you're asking is, how do we become more productive? Because when you think about productivity, it's both cost and upside. You can look at Andela today and say, it was about doing that. But to the company, there are options where go hire a Stanford grad for $120,000 or come hire an Andela grad for $24,000. You understand what I'm saying? So on our side, yes, our fellows are getting increasingly more income, but on their side, they're saving huge costs on student loans, on debts, so on and so forth.
And then that money that those people are making is being fed back into the trainings, right? So they're getting more and more exposure. They're being tasked with more challenging problems within the space, which is obviously elevating their skills even more. So they're sort of moving towards this direction. I imagine that our engineers would almost be on par with the rest of the globe at some point. Just that China originally started was the cheapest manufacturer, is now moving towards that direction.
Exactly.
And in turn, Chinese factories are now moving to Africa to find cheaper solutions to manufacturing. Exactly. What's going to happen when our engineers are no longer competitive in price?
When you talk about competitiveness in price, that's only going to be a function of supply. There's always an engineer who's competitive at whatever price you're offering. And that the price you're offering is the question, and the quality you're demanding is the question. That said, there's a lot of things that are changing about the space. So for example, we just invested in a company called GateStart. We invested in them before, actually. But what this company basically does is just automate coding and peer review workflows. So as a developer, I'm given a problem, I write a bunch of code, I send it back, right? And they look at it, and they basically allow a more senior person on the team to look at it as well. And they only accept the code, right, that they think will work on their system. But every time they accept that code, we get paid.
Whether they use it or not. Or actually, only when they accept when they're using it. Okay.
So that is an exciting option. I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
So almost like you're automating the coding. You're making like an open source service so that anyone can have access to it, and you just get paid for it.
Simple.
Got you. And this is a Nigerian company that's just currently doing this?
This is a company out of the US actually, but has a lot of Nigerian developers on the platform.
A lot of them from Mandela?
Quite a number.
Fantastic. So with all of this stuff that you've been doing, I imagine you're exhausted.
Yeah. It's tiring.
It does. I can imagine it takes quite a bit on you, physically, mentally, I dare say even emotionally. You can't do great work and you're not making a significant amount of sacrifice.
Very key.
So I want to kind of just delve in a little bit about those sacrifices that you feel that you're possibly making in the last few years, and how what does that look like for you, right? The person listening and thinking, wow, his life is incredible. He's come such a leap. You know, they watch you speak on stages globally, and they listen to your story, and they're in awe, and they're really like, wow, this is incredible. One person has achieved all of this. And then you mentioned things like you said, the sacrifices, and I've heard you mention this several times on your talks, right? You can't do great work without a degree of sacrifice, right? But what does that sacrifice look like for you? How's it been in the last decade?
You know, it's been a lot of sacrifice, like I say.
Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is invisible, right? But I mean, and it never stops. That's the funny thing. I mean, you do think that one day there'll be an end to the sacrifice, but the reality of the matter is it doesn't end. So if you don't want to sacrifice, you're better off getting off the treadmill now because it escalates, actually. I mean, much earlier in my career, like I said earlier on the show, it was really about finding a sense of place, right? You were this person who managed to get out and go abroad. You bucked the trend, you came back. People who come back typically are coming back to do something, whether for themselves or for their parents or for their parents' friends, right? And you don't have those type of ready networks. And even if you did, they're not your first choice. So the first sacrifice is in understanding that setup would put you in a particular situation in terms of your living situation, because you really do have to now live within your means, right? We have to be able to pay rent because there's no parents' roof I can sleep under. You have to be able to pay your bills. You have to be able, so those are the first sacrifice. But it gets worse because at the end of the day...
It gets worse?
Yeah, it gets worse because unfortunately, if you do good work in this country, you're in high demand and short supply. So you keep getting handed more and more and more responsibilities. And if you're not careful, right, you can really drown yourself, right? And a lot of people have died on account of the fact that the reward for good work is more work. So, but nonetheless, you also see that you're needed. And it's always a pleasure to be needed. So you have to balance those two. Another one, the reality of this country, Nigeria is a construction site, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just a construction site. And I don't know how many people like their children to play in construction sites. So realistically, depending on your family setup, you may have to make certain decisions, or your family may have to make certain decisions about where you live that may not necessarily align with your own long-term views or ambitions. And that's how you have families being split. So it's an increasing occurrence, right? Where, a ton of married men in Lagos are living single. And it's because there's a dichotomy between what your family can take on this road to, nationhood, and what you're willing to sacrifice. But even that time away with family is in itself an incredible sacrifice, because a big chunk of your childhood is invisible to your parents. You never really get to know your family until they're much, much older, in their mid-20s. And you discover, okay, that's the child. Because you're too busy working for them to actually get to know them while they're growing up. But like I always say, the Bible says, if a man wants to build a house, he has to first of all sit down and count the costs. And if he knows that he doesn't have enough to build the house, he shouldn't start. And that is something that every person who wants to build has to do. It's an exercise that you don't get out of. You can't be wishy-washy about it. You can't believe you're going to somehow be the special one that gets to not sacrifice. No matter how heavy the grace of God is on you, you will make sacrifices, and you just have to determine in your heart which ones are worth making and which ones are not. But I think a lot of people delude themselves that they can have it all.
You've made a lot of sacrifices in the last few years. I can sense it just from listening to you. Would you say that they've been worth it so far?
It depends. I think it's too early to tell. And ultimately, I think the question of whether it's worth it or not is in the impact, right? And let's be very honest, right? It's a scale of sacrifices. There are people going to bed with no food. There are people whose fathers and their mothers are dead because of Boko Haram. There are people who, are men in uniform, in some bush somewhere in Sambisa, hunting down terrorists, ready to go home at any moment if they step on the wrong mortar, or if they get ambushed. So when I look at my sacrifices in comparison with theirs, I'm almost ashamed to call them sacrifices.
Does that help?
No, help what?
Like when you sort of think about it, when you're having those moments, I know we all do, when you're having those incredibly bad days and it seems like everything is going wrong, or you have one emergency or the other, and then you think and you try your level best to put these things in perspective. And once you manage to get to the place where it's like, wait, people have real problems. Does that help you to sort of
Not
stay
really.
steady?
I mean, that somebody's having a more miserable day than mine doesn't make mine better.
So when you're having those incredibly bad days, and it feels like the weight of all the problems in these businesses are just overwhelming, if you're able to sort of think about people out there who in your understanding have far worse issues, far worse problems, does it help you to sort of carry the weight of yours?
No, it doesn't. Because at the end of the day, somebody having a more miserable day than you doesn't make yours better, right? But I think what helps me in those moments is two things. One, it's in service, right? Your sacrifices are not in vain, right? It's temporary pain for eternal glory, right? So I think for me, I think about it from that perspective, more like, yes, this is incredibly painful and this is, very discomforting. However, there's a reason for it. And I think that's one. And I think the second thing that I am particular about when it comes to making these sacrifices is the reality that at the end of the day, each of us is a creature of purpose, right? When God makes us, He makes us to, quite literally, He says in Jeremiah that in Isaiah that He created you from your mother's womb for a purpose. And so long as the pain is in the line of that purpose, it works. What can be even more sad is when you're enjoying yourself, but you're not in God's purpose for your life. It can feel good in the short term, but you're going to look at your life at 60 and be like, wow, what a waste. And so for me, I think I always look at it from that perspective. Everybody has their cross to bear. Everybody has their burden to bear. I don't think of what I carry as, they are sacrifices. I'm not going to downplay them, but I don't think of them as sacrifices that are unbearable when I consider the why of those sacrifices. And I think that's what helps me get through them.
So I've been in your house on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And we've gone to church.
Yes.
Unknowingly. So we've sat there and we've had conversation and you have taken us to church. So I already know that your faith is something that's very, very important to you. Now, for those who are listening, who obviously don't know you, Talk to us about the role that your faith plays in this journey of entrepreneurship and business for you, and where you've seen the grace play out in your journey so far.
Yeah, I think for me, my faith is the foundation of my work, right? And because I look at what I do as ministry. My father is on the pulpit, but I think of my own ministry as really in the streets, in the business arena, where there are things that God wants us to do. And for me, when I do business, I'm not doing business to make money. It's the least of my problems, least of my worries. I'm doing business because there is some value that God wants to realize out of a particular unfortunate circumstances. God wants to turn the stone that the builders rejected into the chief cornerstone in some way, shape, or form. God wants to execute a plan that really does create streams in the desert. So I look at my work as an extension of working with God on delivering on possibilities that people may not have realized could exist, and that's why I work, right? I'm never the shareholder bottom line guy. I barely look at the accounts. I actually don't even look at them, and most times I'm not even a signatory because it's not important to me, the money. But I think it's really important to me that God's purpose is being established.
So you have been, I probably say you've been decorated quite a fair bit in your career so far. And you mentioned that the money is not really the core reason as to why it is that you do what you do. But when people watch you on stage and they just see a successful man, someone who has come from, I'll probably say, humble beginnings, right? Mm-hmm, and you have positioned yourself as a thought leader within this space. They want to know, what's your net worth? How does that equate? How does that success equate? So that worries us, right? When someone says they don't know, it's very,
it's so funny.
Like, it's mind blowing.
It's so funny how perception and reality works because, I think about 2019 would be how many years now?
2019, that's what?
So that's right before
about 4
COVID.
years.
Yeah,
Yes.
4 years. Me and God made a pact that I no longer own my money. So, for other people, they'll call it the giving pledge. I'm going to give half my money. No, me, I was like, you know what? We're only doing the stuff you want to do with my money. So what that generally means for me is that 95% of the time I have no money.
Please unpack that. We need to know where the money is going. What's happening?
We're investing. We're like, it's not my money, right? Mm-hmm. It belongs to God, and I'm just a custodian. And what it means, we're taking incredible risks with every naira, every dollar we have.
I love that.
So we trust God for our daily needs.
So we're both part of FDE, mm-hmm. and we have our monthly sort of sessions now. For those who are listening who don't know what FDE is, it's faith-driven entrepreneurs, mm-hmm. and we've sort of tapped into this network of entrepreneurs who really uphold their faith in everything that we do. And that custodian of God's resource is, I think, probably one of the cornerstones of our teachings, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how are we managing God's resources on mm-hmm. a day-to-day? So I think it's fantastic that you said that, because that just kind of leads me to sort of my next question about when you are investing in these businesses, what ultimately, as a faith-driven entrepreneur yourself, and as somebody who understands that God's work and God's resource and money has to be put to work, how are you selecting the organizations that you're investing in actively?
I'm not.
Interesting.
I'm not doing the selection. I think it really comes down to the burden, right? What is it that God is trying to do at a particular point in time? And what is our role? right? Because God might be trying to do something, but you have no role in it. Your job is just to sit back and enjoy. But I think for us, what we look at is, and that's why you see we're very different from most of the other firms, because we don't do pitches. You can't pitch Future Africa, right?
Why is that?
Because we don't invest that way. We're not looking for money. So walking up to us and telling us there's an incredible business opportunity in X is like, oh, that sounds great for you, but it's not what God's telling us to do with our money. And so we look for problems. Like we're very obsessed now about AI and jobs and, the what God wants to do with nature, taking us away from internal combustion engines and moving us to electric motors so we can preserve the environment. We're very excited about what God is doing in education, where people who've never seen the four walls of a school can learn in their own language and acquire knowledge. And we can see how they're learning and what they're learning and guide them to a job where they would be able to glorify God with their abilities. I mean, that's how we think about the investing we do. So it's a lot less about, there's a $50 billion opportunity in doing X. It's like, that sounds great. Go do it. But that's not where our money goes. Our money is very mission focused. So you can't pitch us because we're looking for stuff. You're not. We're always looking for you. You're never looking for us.
Got you. So what would be the best way to position to be found by a company or a VC like Future Africa?
Just do your work. Keep doing your work.
Keep working.
The more you do your work, the more we, God puts a burden on our heart. We come look for you. Most times, most of our investments, we actually give them a call and say, can we learn more about what you're doing? It looks really interesting and we feel led to work with you.
Fantastic. Usually people like to sort of ask this question about if you could go back in time, was there anything you would possibly change, right? I think my question really is about, if you could go back in time, was there anything you wanted to do that you had wished you had done at a particularly pivotal time in your journey?
That's a good question. Well, I think that, the path I'm on right now is a path that perhaps under different circumstances I would have taken after I had left Andela, which is, how do you work with entrepreneurs to build, businesses that turn our biggest challenges into global business opportunities. And I think about, Flutterwave as the first of those fruits in some sense, right? Where I was able to work with Benga Bola and, help the business to be able to sort of scale a Nigerian business from almost nothing to becoming a very significant player in the industry by the grace of God. So I think I wish I had done that a bit earlier. Thankfully, I managed to do a little bit of it towards the tail end. But I wish I had perhaps taken that plunge a lot earlier because, it's so funny. I fought it with everything I had. My mindset was, the honest truth is, the line of business I'm in is the worst side of the deal, despite people's perception.
Really?
Yeah.
What makes you say that?
So when you're an entrepreneur, right, you own your shares outright, right? And so you there's a direct correlation between the amount of work you put in and what you get out of it. The problem with our economics as VCs is that, but for the money you have to contribute, which is typically 2% of what you raise, you actually own nothing until you start making money for your investors. And by making money, what I mean is the way our model works, my investors give me $10 million before I make a dime beyond my salary. I have to return $10 million. And then, even after, I don't get 100% of the upside. I get just 20. So it's a thankless job. But somehow I wish I had done it earlier because I think, we could have, we managed to, but I think we could have accelerated a lot of things in terms of the entrepreneurs. And I think for me, what got me out of bed was just building a company every 3 years is great, but, by the time I'm 30, I'll have only built, by the time I'm 40, I'd have built 3. Meanwhile, in the space of the same 3 years, I invested in 100. You understand? So the stepwise difference between what you can do when you empower people versus what you can do on your own is pretty remarkable from an outcomes perspective.
So I think I heard you speak once saying that you are not a creative.
No, I'm not.
So if you were to sum up, your job role in all these organizations, and even Future Africa and the role in which you play, and give yourself a job description, what would it be?
So there's an old Italian word that was mostly used by the Italian mafia. They call them consiglieres. And the consigliere's job is to take the vision of the Don, right, and transform it to very tactically into an executable plan. And I feel that's the role I play, right? You have a fantastic idea in your head that you want to play out somehow in Nigeria. My job is to take that fantastic plan and make it happen by bringing all the pieces together. Consigliere is not a foot soldier, doesn't engage in the trade, but on the strength of relationships, he brings together the plan and supports the Don to execute. So that's my job.
How does one find a consigliere?
How does one find a consigliere? Don't think you find them. I think they get sent to you.
By the grace of God?
Yeah, you have to go and pray. But that's the job I find myself doing. I'm sent to people, right? I just, if it's what God wants to do, I'll show up. We'll get a plan together. We'll execute, however impossible it seems. And then once the thing is up and running, I disappear.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, E.
You're welcome.
That has been absolutely amazing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Guys, I'm not a consigliere. But I think one thing that I do know that I am is an entrepreneur that knows how to pray. And I think often so we forget how much our faith really has to be immersed into our journeys. As you're going about your journey every day, please make sure that whatever God, whatever higher power that you are seeing to, you're asking it every day to send you your very own consigliere. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. But guys, please, please, please stay on course, hold on to the dream firmly and keep praying. And as per usual, take care of yourself and don't forget to be extraordinary in the way that only you can be. Bye, guys.